Over the past 10 years, I've experienced every high and low you could possibly imagine in trading. I'm 10 years now into my journey. I feel it's about time I can make this video, and it puts me in a point of authority because 10 years in the game, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself. And I'm now in a position where I feel I can really share those insights and pass them on to anybody who may be watching this who might be 2, 3, 4 years in, where you have a lot to learn still and you've got a lot of your journey to go still. So I'm hoping this video can bring as much insight and as much helpful advice and education to any trader or potential aspiring trader watching this. Not many people will get to this point, a decade in trading, a decade in this very tough skill there where we see a lot of people fail. For me, failure rates are so high because people aren't wanting to stick at it enough. From day dot when we're born and we're kids, we are not programmed to lose money. And this is why trading is such a difficult industry, because you're going to lose money, as I'm sure you all have watching this video, especially in your first few years. You're going to lose a lot of money, or the money that you choose to allocate to lose. And we're taught from day one that's the wrong thing to do, is to lose money. And so it can put a lot of people off. A lot of people get to a stage maybe 2, 3 years in when they just say, this is not for me, I'm sick of this, and they then blame it on being a scam, or they blame it on being that it's impossible to make it. And obviously, like I said, this decade journey that I've been on now, I hope can share some valuable insights. So I am 10 years in, as I said, but my journey actually started about 13 years ago. So I'm currently 28 at the time of filming this video. Lots of family friends tell me I'm getting old. I beg to differ, and I feel that I'm very young still. But my trading journey actually started when I was 15. I kept it very, very, very on the down low. I wasn't the best at school in terms of academia. I was well behaved, but I was just the way school learning suited me, or I say it didn't suit me. I just didn't get on well with it, and the way exams are, you're assessed. But I was good at a couple of subjects, and that was sports, that was economics, and that was maths. Now, I got to the point when I was older in A levels where maths got to the point where it was too difficult, and that's something I then sort of weaned away from. But economics was something that always felt very naturally to me. And I've always had an interest, like I said, from when I was 15, around how can people out there, when we see wealth, when I see, supercars, when we see these sorts of things, I think I learned very early that working a typical job like 99% of people do would never give me the money, the freedom that I wanted. And being completely honest, I got into trading like everybody else does. I got into it for the potential earning potential, the income, the freedom, but the money ultimately, like 99.9% of people do. I'll always be transparent with that. But I was always well grounded in my head, though. Yes, it was because of the money, but it was more so to just give myself that freedom of time to then do what I want. Because I like playing a lot of sports. I had lots of plans. I wanted to see the world. I've always been interested in other cultures. So it was always very important to me that I had to have a skill that brought me an income, that brought me, it was on my own accord, and I could do it myself. So I learned that lesson very early, which I'm very grateful that I did. Because I started then at 15, starting to look at things online, look at newspapers that were still a massive thing back then, and just starting to look into the industry. And the more I looked, of course, the more I was excited by it, the more I wanted to learn. Now, obviously, you can't set up a broker account until you're 18. So those sort of that 15 to 18 years of age, obviously, I was finishing GCSEs and then I was finishing A levels. So was I doubling down on trading at the time in education? Absolutely not. But it was always in the background, and every month there'd always be, maybe on a weekend or at some downtime, I'd always have a look and a Google, I'd watch some videos here and there, and it was sort of ticking along in the background. So when I started at 18, that's when I could properly double down. So I'll try not to waffle too much in this video, but my first then proper, from 18, my first year and a half in the markets was dire. It was shocking, just like probably most people's out there. I would be hopping along to different sort of information. I would never double down on one thing. I was luckily not caught in the signals trap for too long. They were about even back then when I was starting. And I'll always remember his name. It was through WhatsApp they did the signals, and his name was Tyler. And to this day, I remember his WhatsApp. He didn't have a profile photo. That should have been a red flag in itself. But I remember having probably 3-4 months of them, and actually the first month went quite well. It was a bit of a false sense of security, thinking, "Oh crikey, this is a lot easier. What's all the fuss about?" And obviously, then it crashed and burned, and luckily it was only it was only a couple of £100. It was money I could afford to lose. I've always had a job. From a young guy, from 11 and 12, I always had a paper round. And then when I was 16, 17, I worked in a Waitrose for many months. So I always had a bit of money coming in, not a lot at that age as a late teenager, but I had some coming in so I could start investing into this journey. Anyway, it was around a year and a half after back and forthness, struggling in this minefield of, well, what actually does work then? Signals obviously didn't for me, like they won't for anybody. And then it was until I came across this gentleman. His name was Rupert, and I'll always remember him because he set me up for success to this day. He was in his late 30s, early 40s at the time, I believe. And I'd been watching him for a while, scoping him out, because at this point I'd obviously realized there's a lot of people out there, even back then, that weren't educating for the right reasons. You know who the type of people I mean. But I watched him for ages. He had a lot more experience, of course. He was 10 plus years in the markets himself, and watched him for a while, and eventually made the decision to invest in my education, basically, because I was sick and tired. And some people will only come to this realization many years down the line. So again, I'm pleased I found this realization around 18 months in. In the grand scheme of things, that's nothing in terms of time, in terms of successful trading. So I found him, invested. He was actually really expensive, but again, I always had a bit of money coming in. So I took the plunge, and best thing I ever did. He set me up. He kept things simple. He was much more higher time frames. And when I say swing trading, he was hugely swing trading. So I might take a position once or twice a week, and hold for maybe 3-4 days or up to a week and a half. Rupert was someone that would take a trade and he'd be holding it for probably a month, 2 months. He'd be working off monthly timeframes, weekly timeframes. And so in the end, I adapted his strategy for myself. He always drilled into me, and this was the importance of having him, actually, how rough and how tough trading is, and all of the things I would need to do first to even get myself into a position where the money that I'd invested in his education was going to pay off. And I remember then working with him for probably a good year, which took me to about 2.5 years in, nearly the 3-month mark, where things were really then starting to come through. And it was around three and a bit years where I started becoming, I would say, consistently profitable. I'll use the word consistently profitable there. And what I mean by that, at that time of that stage of, if you like, was most months I'd be bringing in a percentage return, a positive percentage return, but it might have just been 0.5%, 1%. There'd be months I'd be break even, and there'd be months where I'd lose still. So over a course of a quarter, a couple of quarters, and a year, I would still be up, but it would be minimal. We'd be talking maybe 2-3%, something that a high interest savings account would give you. So it was then, as I constantly refined, I did a lot more work in terms of back testing, forward testing. I vigorously scrutinized myself. And it was around, like I said, that 3-year mark, 3.5-year mark, where then things really started to fall into place. Now, it was at the same time where this is where my worst moment of my 10-year career in trading so far, is where this happened. I've made a reel about this before. I managed to scale an amount of money. I think I probably put in 1,000 to 2,000, and I'd built it and I'd built it and I'd built it. And I'd kept feeding in income from my job at the time. And got to the point where I had about just about mid-30s in terms of 35 odd £1,000. And most of that was profit, because yes, I've been feeding in my income, but most of that was profit. Now, being honest and reflecting back on that time, there was lots of times where I would over leverage, and there were still habits at this stage where I hadn't 100% finely tuned things. I was still making the odd mistake, or over leveraging at times, over positioning at times. But that did lead me to obviously build up a healthy amount of capital. Now, karma is karma, and I believe everything happens for a reason in life, and you need to be fully self-accountable. Even if it feels like it's not your fault, obviously this very much was my fault, but I believe you should be very self-accountable in all things in life, always. It's much easier to then deal with. Um, and I ended up losing about £32,000. Now, that was profit. Again, it wasn't like it was actual hard earned money from slaving away at a job. Most of it was profit, which in hindsight was a bit of a saving grace. I still had a bit of capital left once my broker had taken me out with the margin call. But it was a very hard lesson, and I'll always remember that, always, because it led to me having a lot of time away from the markets and my laptop, and just having complete stripping, complete downtime. And in hindsight, it's one of the best days I've had, because you don't learn from good experiences. You learn from your losing trades, or you should be, at least. And a losing trade like that, it was on GBP USD cable. I was trying to short it in it because it was already incredibly bullish, and already had it shot up a huge amount over a period of days and weeks. And I thought, right, it's got to turn at some point. So it didn't even fit my strategy. It fell well outside of my rule set. It was just this moment of sheer stupidity, emotional trading, whatever you want to call it. And I learned the hard way, and I'm glad I did, because ever since then, that was the major catalyst then to a huge step up in performance. And Rupert at the time obviously knew about it. I got an absolute hammering, and I mean a hammering, and rightly so, because if I didn't, who's to say I may have done something like that again? And I think it's so important having that mentor to keep you on the straight and narrow, to someone else to keep you accountable whilst you're still in that learning phase. And I'll always be thankful to him, always. And I think if I didn't get a mentor, then it would have taken even longer to get to where I am today. So I'll always be very grateful for that. And someone keeping you accountable is hugely important. I would say, looking back now, my sort of top lessons to anybody watching this would be: you are never, ever going to make it in trading if you do not prioritize your risk management. I cannot say that clearly enough. If you follow me for some time, you'll know that I preach about it all the time, because it's ultimately the biggest factor that either leads you to success or failure. Your risk to reward is what is most important. Is what is most important. Maintaining the same amount of risk consistently is, again, vitally important, because you are going to have losing trades. I cannot stress that enough. Trading is not one of those things, as you get better and better, that you get less losses. You'll get less losses overall compared to obviously your first couple of years, when it's just loss after loss after loss after loss, but you will still incur losses, and you get what I mean by this. And so when you have those losses, we make sure they're minimal. When you have those winners, as I've said many times before on here, you double down and you press your advantage. And that's how you get that probability in your favor over a period of many weeks, many months, many quarters, and many years. So risk management is key. Number two for me was obviously investing in my education. That's where I saw the most growth, because then I knew it was information that I could trust. It's information that I could take away. It was information that I could double down on and really then level myself up. And third of all, I'd say, is just don't stop. Don't give up. It's a very difficult skill. I'd say it's a skill that takes a lot longer to master than pretty much most skills out there. There's the technical side, the psychological side. Trading is very much a lifestyle, but I don't mean it in that way that you would see online, all that nonsense and BS. I mean, trading is very much a lifestyle where simplicity works. Simplicity is key. Having a simple personal life works wonders for keeping your trading simple and less emotional. And just being very organized and very structured and very disciplined. They feed into one another, both your personal and trading life. So those would be my biggest tips and takeaways, I'd say. And again, without waffling for too long, I've always traded in private. Very few people have always known. It's something that I've always done. And like I said, I've just always had this sort of mantra of keeping my head down, working hard at it, and sort of building in silence, because it's better to talk with results than it is with sort of saying you're going to do this or you're going to do that. Just do it and get the results, and then maybe talk about it. Anyway, long story short, obviously built capital over the times. I've dipped into prop firms over the years in terms of utilize them for payouts to continue scaling my personal capital. And it really is key to get that personal capital up to eventually then allow you, the watcher, who's watching, to eventually transition to full time. But you need a hefty chunk behind you to really make that transition seamless and to make sure there's no emotion involved. I'm at a point now where it's October 2024. I made a decision last December 2023, so we're about 10 months in after making this decision. I was away for New Year, went to a lovely hotel in the countryside around Norfolk by the coast in the east of England. And I was sat there in the hotel bar. I remember it like yesterday. Had a Guinness in hand, and it was this lovely, lovely hotel bar, fireplace, Christmas tree was there, still all lit up. And I remember just seeing a couple of reels. And again, I've not been the biggest social media person ever anyway, even with a personal Instagram account. And I just thought, I am so sick of seeing the amount of shit, the amount of BS out there on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. There is so much trash, and it got to the point where I thought, you know what? There's not. I couldn't find anybody that had, maybe with Instagram profiles or YouTube profiles, that had basically been in the space for more than 3-4 years. And so there's people out here educating with just 3-4 years of experience, and it's not enough. It really isn't. You've got a lot to learn still if you're 3-4 years into your journey. And I thought, you know what? Let's double down for the next 30 days. I'll start an Instagram account. So it's a platform I knew already from having a personal account. Let's start an Instagram page. Let's post daily. And let's just make sure we post daily with genuine education, genuine no nonsense BS, where people are getting the information that they need, that's correct, that's proper, that's factual, that's going to genuinely help their trading game, without mattering what stage of the journey they're in. And I did that for 30 days. Within that time, there was a couple of reels that went viral, which obviously naturally then gained my following. And then we started getting messages, started taking on the odd mentee, and never looked back really. Trading at this stage, I have a lot of free time, so it made sense as well to start an online profile, I guess. So I'm very glad I did. We've now built the community up to 50 members. Members now, a lot of them securing 6 figures worth of funding. A lot of members doing very, very well, and nothing beats now a message where people are thanking you, they're full of gratitude, and it's the best decision I've ever made. It's something I will continue doing. I said to myself I was going to assess it month by month. I then said to myself I'll assess it by Christmas 2024, but it is something now I think I'll continue on long term, because it's great for networking. It's great meeting like-minded traders. I've made a couple of contacts now that are full-time traders. That's brilliant to then hang out with and go for some drinks. So really pleased I've come on the journey. I'll be honest, 10 years, a decade now, best position I've ever been in. But please set your time horizons appropriately. It's not a short-term fix in terms of getting over the finish line with trading, as I'm sure you're all aware of and you've all been educated on properly. Get yourself a mentor. I think that's the biggest valuable turn I had in my journey. Otherwise, it's just a minefield of information out there. It's a minefield of what do you double down on. You need to know, as an aspiring trader, you need to know that what you're working on strategy-wise and data-wise and mindset-wise is going to get you to that end goal. With there being so much BS out there and so much shit, and there's too much available information out there, because 95% of it's crap and it's trash. So finding yourself a mentor was massive for me, and I'll always, as I said earlier, be very grateful to Rupert. We're still in contact to this day, and I'll still send him sort of P&L for the year, P&L for a couple of quarters, and just sort of share it with him to see sort of how far we've come over the years. So I hope that helps. If you're obviously watching this and you're an aspiring trader and you're within your sort of first 4 or 5 years where there's going to be lots of struggle, keep going. Do not give up. Keep investing in yourself, investing in your education. That is ultimately what's going to get you to where you want to be. But yeah, hopefully there's many, many more years to come of trading, and touch wood, I live a long, healthy life. I think it's something I'll always continue to do, even into old age. It's a skill for life. And this is why it doesn't matter how long it takes you guys, continue doubling down on it, because it's a skill that will continue to pay you for the rest of your life. As always, guys, I hope that's helped and just shared a bit of insight. I've tried to keep it as concise as I can. But yeah, I'll catch you on the next one.